joined by the wonderful Matt Katz. Hello, Matt. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to
All the
you.
time zones in this
All the time
podcast.
zones.
Yeah. So we're flying across the pond once again to meet you. Whereabouts do we find you in the world right now?
I live in Portland, Oregon, which is the jewel of the Northwest,
Mhm.
North American continent, and it's a typical rainy day here. Tons of pine trees, tons of mist.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's.
Oregon. Have you been up here?
I've not. I've never been to Portland. So I have been to the States, but that's not somewhere I've made it to. But I feel like it always comes up in conversation, like somewhere that I should visit. So it's really like arty place,
Very.
quite queer place as well.
It's
I've
becoming a
told
very queer
been told
place.
this.
Yeah, and I think when I first moved here in 2014. And I have been visiting here for several years before my husband's family is he's from here. He's from Oregon originally, and his family is here. And so when we first started to come visit, there wasn't as much, and that was like in 2009. There wasn't like as much going on, both in the queer scene and in the queer music scene.
Yeah.
But over the time, I feel like both queer dance underground parties have popped up. Ton of queer bands and queer musicians of all varieties, like of all genres, too, have popped up, and I think it's become a very, very inclusive place. I think also because it's like 3 hours south of Seattle, which is like a big
Right.
grunge, still very much a grunge and folk music capital. Portland gets a lot of that overflow.
Mm. So
You
are
know,
there quite a lot of venues then? Is it like quite like traditional gig venue
yeah,
bases, or is it? Mm.
definitely. Though I will say, not obviously not as much as Seattle. I mean, Seattle feels like a big city, whereas Portland kind of feels like a smaller version of a big city, like a sort of condensed version. But there are like a lot of venues, and there's a lot of venues here that have like a lot of history, where, and I think, from what I observed, there hasn't been in years past a whole lot of queer bands and artists playing at some of those old venues, but over, I would say, yeah, like since 2015, those venues are starting to get penetrated,
Mm.
literally,
So to
by
so to speak.
sort of speak, by queer music. Also, additionally, there are new venues that have opened up in the past 5 years, 6 years, that have been dedicated to like having a space. Particularly, there's a venue that unfortunately closed during COVID, but I think they're kind of revising their life. But Crush Bar pitches itself as being a very inclusive queer space for not just the cis queer world, but the trans and non-binary queer world. And they have a performance space in the back that's dedicated to both drag performances, bands, singers, poets, performance artists. So I think like it's becoming that place. I feel like Portland is like this close to popping off, if that makes sense.
But then do you want it to pop off? Because then
I
it's so.
do. Um, I do, but I'm not a native here. So I feel like, it's important that I myself remember that I'm a visitor.
Mm,
I mean, obviously, we're all visitors of every place on planet Earth, but
very true.
particularly for me, like I come from someplace else and I'm a visitor here. And I think there's a lot of chatter about, amongst natives here that like, Portland liked being the weirdo, like the stepchild.
Yeah.
And I think that that's slowly changing, and I can tell that there's discomfort around that. But I also think that's just something that happens to cities.
Mm.
Um, so I think I want it to happen, but I want it to happen organically. I wouldn't want to push it. I think it's like it's a fine line.
Yeah, absolutely. And so where does Matt Katz sit within that world? So you describe yourself to me as someone who sort of writes in um, short film approach. I'm just checking my notes because you sent me some beautiful
Yeah,
notes about you there.
I sent
But I
you.
really was really intrigued by what you're saying there about that songwriting approach. But also, we were just chatting before
Yeah.
as well. You were describing your room, which you can see if you watch this on YouTube. You'll see that a teaching space behind you as well. So we were
It's a
bonding slightly over the fact that we also both teach music as well. So
both teach music.
I think that typical musician thing of always probably teaching at some point in your life because
Right.
that you have to do that to pay some bills. But yeah,
Well,
so
it's funny. Yeah. No, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, no, no, I was just gonna say, yeah. So tell us a little bit about yeah how that shapes what you do day in and day out in your music making.
Well, it's interesting. My mother's best friend is an art teacher, not a music teacher. She teaches fine art. She teaches, particularly, she teaches drawing fundamentals and also, um, building on fundamentals. And she said something to me, I think, I want to say maybe I was in my early 20s when she said this to me. She was like, Matt Katz, which everybody calls me that, by the way. It's my full name. It's my full name. It's my real name. My own father calls me Matt Katz. So I think it's also just because Matt is a very popular name. And, so you gotta know your
You're
letters.
getting
And
your
so
full
she
names
sits
all the
down.
time.
Yeah. So it's always full name around here.
Great.
And so she says to me, Matt Katz, um, you got to remember that artists only actually earn money in two ways. And one of the ways is commissions,
Hmm.
meaning like you're getting hired to make something, either for someone else or for some greater purpose. The second way is teaching. Everything else that you do as an artist has to be done for the love of making that piece of art, whatever it is. And I think that there's a lot of legitimacy around what she's saying. I know, like, you can argue that, like somebody, like a pop artist goes and makes an album. Kanye made Donda, for the pleasure of his own art, when really, in reality, um, Kanye needed to make that album to fulfill a contract that was a commission.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Um, I find for myself, it was inevitable that I was going to be a piano teacher and a voice teacher at some point, mostly because my grandmother was a piano teacher. And she was my piano teacher for like the first 12 years that I took piano lessons.
Ah, nice.
Until such time that we both felt it was time for me to go to somebody else that wasn't a grandparent.
Hmm.
And, I found a lot of pleasure in doing it because, number one, like it keeps me on my game, keeps my fingers limber, keeps me learning. It also, as I've gotten older, it keeps me in touch with like, what are like kids listening to? Like,
Right.
what do they like? What are they turned on by? I mean, it's always been clear to me, even for myself, that most people who go and take private lessons in an instrument do not want to play Bach and do not want to play Stravinsky and do not want to play piano literature. They want to play they want to be able to like take what they're listening to on their playlists and hang out with their friends and
Yeah.
jam. And I feel like for me, as a teacher, I'm giving them options. I'm
Right.
saying, yes, you can do this. You
Mm.
can play, you can play some piano lit if you want. We can, and as a voice teacher as well, like let's certainly study
Yeah.
everything from art songs to pop songs. But I also want you to know that you have a choice. You don't have to take this route. You can also be a songwriter. You can also
Mm.
be a musician in several bands who makes a lot of money just doing that.
Yeah.
I keep doing it and I continue to teach because I want parents and
Mm.
I want young musicians to know that this isn't the like, playing, Bach and Grieg is like not the only things
Right.
that you have options, and it's not the only. And I feel like in our world of private teachers, there aren't enough of us that are doing that.
Mm. Do you get kids that or whoever you teach that come and show you stuff that they've written as well?
Yes.
Like I love
Oh,
that moment when that happens when I teach and like whoever it is, like particularly if it's quite a young kid as well and they've made up something, tiny little bit. I'm like yes, I'm like this is what I actually really love doing. So they've
yeah.
like found the secret within me, and I'm like yes, let's make some music together. I don't
Yes.
care about the notes. Let's make some
Yeah, who cares?
stuff.
Absolutely. Oh, Ben, exactly that. And I see that it happens more often
Mm.
than I think I even have the bandwidth for sometimes.
Yeah.
Because yes, I have to make sure that they have pieces to practice,
Yeah.
theory assignments to do. I'm pretty old school in that way. Like every week you've got shit to practice. Every
Yeah.
week you've got scales to practice. Every week you also have theory assignments to do. But I always make sure that there's absolutely a space for that. And I have plenty of students that started with me as like, yes, they want to study, let's say piano literature, or they want to study musical theater singing, for example, which is something I feel like I excel at. But after a while, every one of them at some point says, hey, like I had this melody that was like bugging me and like I have nobody else to show it to. And I'm like, well, this is the perfect place
Yeah.
to do it. And yeah, all the time. And I have a few students that have become strictly, that's all we work on now is songwriting, production. I teach them if they have the gear, you know, like I'll teach them a little bit of the basics of recording, miking, editing, you know, either, you know, like I'll use BandLab if they don't have actually any software. If they do have any software, I will show them how to operate it.
Yeah.
Just because I feel like, yeah, like most of what we end up, I feel like there's a very small window of people who will get to be concert musicians, right? People who will make their lives just
Mm.
playing concert music.
Hmm.
There's more work for people who are songwriters, arrangers,
Yeah.
backing musicians, backing vocalists of some kind. Uh, there's just more, there's more for you to do out there. So I encourage it. Even if they don't end up actually becoming songwriters themselves, I think it's a good skill to learn because
Mm.
it's like a good project management skill.
Yeah.
Like how do you see something through from the beginning to the end? And so I feel like, I don't know, do you feel this way as a private, do you teach private lessons also?
Yeah, yes, I do. So I work in a school, and then I will sometimes have them outside of that as well. So yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's also like showing like the realism behind doing music if they want to actually have music in their life as part of their career. It's like, you know, you have to do all these different avenues that you've just spoken about to make it
Yeah,
work, to make it work. But then, you know, that's it. Then you're like, you find yourself and you're working in music, even if it's not just maybe the one, you know, idea you had in your mind of what maybe being a musician is, and that's part of
right.
it. But actually, there's all this other stuff that you get to do as well, which is equally as fun and challenging. And you know,
It is. It is really fun and challenging. And it is also kind of, you know, I feel like I had that lesson very, very early on.
mm,
I started taking lessons when I was maybe 5.5, 6 years old. But, you know, I grew up in South Brooklyn in New York City and in a pretty like, you know, average home, you know, apartment house, tons of people around. My brother also played. Um, you know, early on, my parents were like, you got to get a job, you know, and if you want to have all the things, like you got to earn it. Like, you know, I wanted to pierce my ears, and my mom was like, sure, if you can pay for it,
yeah,
you know. So, you know, one of my first jobs was playing piano in a wedding band,
hmm,
and it was really eye-opening how much self-facilitation musicians have to do to be prepared for gigs like that versus, let's say, I would say like a musician who's like just playing concert music.
right,
They have like endless hours of rehearsal ahead of them. They also get sheet music,
yeah,
you know. But when you have, but most musicians in this world um, don't get those materials,
mm,
nor do they get a lot of lead time to prepare. You know, like when I would get called for a gig with these wedding bands, which I continued to play through most of my 20s and early 30s. Um, you got a list of songs,
yeah,
and sometimes the singer would tell you what key they sing those songs in.
yeah,
And as the piano player, you know, you're part of the rhythm section, but you're also expected to, like, you know, I'll never forget this, you know, having to learn all of those parts for Sir Duke by Stevie Wonder, having to learn
yeah.
them with
Wow.
no sheet music, no nothing, just the recording, and then having to transpose it there on the spot, you know. And you're just, you know,
So,
especially the wedding band, you are expected to play those songs like the record,
oh yeah,
or else you won't get hired again, and that's it,
yeah,
you know. And a lot of weight is heaped on, I think, the keyboard player, because we got all the sounds, right?
yeah,
We got all the sounds, so we got to have the sounds, we got to have the chops, and we have to not cry about it.
yeah, yeah. Just go and do it and
Which
be
was
it.
hard as a queer person, I will tell you.
Oh yeah, man. Wedding bands, like honestly,
Yeah,
I think they're like machines, the people that are like do that, you know, all the time.
they
I think
are.
it's yeah.
They are machine, and I will say that that is just one example of the way that, like, the life of a musician um, can have so many different little compartments. And or I like to think of an artist's life as kind of like a mandala.
Yeah.
You know, you have different cells that make up your skills and your income. And
Hmm.
at times, one cell kind of gets a little bit bigger right? And that's earning you a lot. And then the other cells, let's say the wedding band cell is now very big, and the songwriting and production cell get a little bit smaller. But then, that changes.
It might
But
change.
I think that the thing that is always like the hardest thing for young musicians to learn is that you will have to create those cells without a lot of materials, and
Right.
you'll just be expected to be prepared.
Mm.
And I just don't know that I will say that maybe 1% of my students are people who I think will actually
Mm.
get that and put in the time, because it's
Right.
very much a
Yeah.
self-guided process. There isn't like a method book that teaches you how to be a working musician.
Yeah.
You just have to find your little niche and carve it out and make it salient if you can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, get the self discipline out there as well. Well,
Yes.
thank you. I feel it was a lovely little a careers fair there for our young musicians who might be listening.
Yes, if any of you want to talk about
Yeah,
this, you can always call me.
get in
I will
touch. Yeah,
absolutely, I will make sure that you're
available for
crying.
lessons.
Yes, exactly. I will make sure that you're crying by the end of it and
Great.
questioning yourself a lot.
That's a good teacher should do. So, but aside from that, tell us a little bit about your own stuff then as a songwriter. We're going to hear one of your tracks as well. If you want to tell us a little bit about that song, which is from an album that you released over the last year. Is that right?
Yeah, I released it kind of in three. The album's called All Them Princes, which I released kind of like in three small volumes first. And it was really kind of a project management tool, a project management and a bank account management tool,
Yeah.
to just like to have it, mixed in small stages, just because the mixing costs are generally when I make a record, that's really where I feel like we should spend the most money.
Mhm.
So, I managed it that way, and then finally released the whole record in its entirety, actually about a little bit more than a month ago. And like I said, the record is called All Them Princes, and um, it was my first time really like compiling what I felt was my best work as a songwriter,
Mhm.
and then turning it into songs. The song that I picked out for you, Joshua of Mayopac, is probably one of the oldest.
Yeah.
I first wrote that song over 10 years ago, but just kind of never did anything with it. And I will say it was the springboard for what the rest of this record became.
Mm.
Um, what I wanted to do was I wanted to write songs about different types of males that I've encountered in my life, mostly queer males, because I felt like that those were stories or archetypes, if you want to call it that I just don't feel like get discussed even amongst queer music itself. Like I just
Yeah.
feel like some of these things, like, I feel like queer music in general is a very, very varied place, filled with all genres. At the time, what I felt like was missing, and this is also now going back more than 10 years ago, I felt that something that was missing was the stuff that wasn't shiny, the stuff that like we're not so proud of doing,
Yeah.
um, the pitfalls of being a queer person that I feel like we don't necessarily like. We'll acknowledge it to each other, but maybe not externally.
Right.
And like we'll whisper in each other's ears, like, oh, like I did blow with this one and it really didn't work out well.
Mhm.
We won't necessarily externally put that in a song.
Yeah.
um Joshua of Mayopac is, that person is a real person. They exist. There's somebody who my cousin set me up on a date with when I was when I was in my early 20s. And um, the song is from the point of view of this person, Joshua Mayopac. They are now living in the big city, and they're from a small town. And they have become this drug using, people deceiving, lying skank, who just kind of weasel their way in and out of terrible situations, including spending all of their parents' money, um, getting locked up in jail, getting their, of course, always losing their wallet. And I feel like they're a type of person that I feel like all queer people have met
I
out
know
of
that
the
I know
club.
this person. Yeah,
You know this
absolutely.
person, like they're never honest about where, about how they ended up where they ended up that night. There's
Hmm.
always some shadiness to the truth. And so in the song, Joshua is texting slash emailing his best friend from back home, back from his small town. And this best friend has obviously helped them out of many a jam. And so it's the laundry list of excuses of how it all went down that Joshua is telling us about. And I remember being on this date with this person, and having them sort of relate to me, which I didn't understand why they were telling me all these terrible things that happened to them. But thinking to myself, wow, I've been there too, and I never want to be there again. And I feel like Joshua to me was like kind of a cautionary tale of like how not to go out.
Hmm.
How not to go out, how because I feel like by the end of the song Joshua is questioning, whether or not he did this right, whether or not he was actually making good choices or not making good choices. I feel like every person while growing up always has a handful of years where they just make one bad choice after the next.
Yeah.
But I feel like we have all seen that messy queen who is, you know, wearing the sparkliest tank top, and you can tell that they are going to do bump after bump in the bathroom and
Hmm.
just trying to turn that party over and over again and failing miserably every
Yeah.
single
I
time.
mean, I literally saw them on Friday night.
Yeah.
You know.
You saw them. And I feel like nowadays, like, they may look a little bit different now, dress wise, but for me, I met this person, when clubs were a very, very different place in New York. Like, you could smoke in clubs at the time. Me and this person, when we went out on the state, we ended up going to a club, and I feel like there was like many a line that they did in the bathroom. And they introduced me to my first like energy drink, like, and I was like, and I was just decided after a few hours of this that I couldn't keep up.
Yeah.
um they were really, really handsome though. Yeah. And
Fair.
that's the thing always about these Joshuas, is they always look great, you know but you never know. And I feel like motivationally, something that I feel like has come up in our conversations
Mm,
amongst queer people is, cis males in particular automatically are born with a place of access, right? Because we are aligned in our skin, and because we are males, and particularly if we present as white, there's certain stuff that people will just accept from us
mm,
no matter what. And which is why I call all of us princes, because we automatically get a certain royal access.
yeah.
Um, because of that, because of our access and because of our place in this world, there are things that we just will never admit to. There are
Mm,
things that are going on in our internal lives that we aren't very proud of, including our own internalized homophobia, which I think comes up quite a bit for us. It's a subject that I feel like is addressed quite a bit on All Them Princes.
yeah.
A lot of the songs are talking about people who, are butt up against internalized homophobia and externalized homophobia. And Joshua of Maopek is definitely one of the characters who I feel like deals with that. And in my estimation, that's why they're such a mess,
Mm,
is because they're not necessarily proud of who they are. So they turn the party and keep it going, to
right. Not sure
not feel.
when to stop that party. Yeah.
Yeah, no, not sure
So-
what to do. It's really
And it
hard to
feels
have.
like so like with the way you're talking about your songs as well, it's like there's quite a lot of like, I don't know if this is the right word, but like morality or like moral tales, or there's like storytelling and kind of lessons to learn. I don't know if that's necessarily something you set out to do, but I know that um, I feel like that's come up quite a lot when I've talked to other queer artists as well. Like there always is quite a lot of thought, I think, behind songs and songwriting, and sort of, yeah,
Definitely.
sharing the queer experience and the sort of lessons that have been learned along the way. Is that something that you think about quite like as part of your songwriting, or does that just come out through itself?
Well, I think it ends up happening more so than something setting out to do, because I think if I for example, I think if I had taken the approach, and that was something I was very conscious of with all of these songs, is that particularly these songs, not always, but with the songs for All Them Princes, I didn't want to, I didn't necessarily want to be the singer of all the songs
Right.
because I'm like, for instance, like if I had set out to write about Joshua from my own perspective, I think I would have judged them very, very harshly. And I don't necessarily think that's fair, because there's a whole mess of reasons why people become messy, right? Let's say. Um, I think that the lesson, I think, organically just comes out, in retrospect, not necessarily on the onset. I think on the onset, I think, for me personally, I want to write a good song that tells a compelling and believable story.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what we hope for, I guess, in getting.
We hope for. And I also want to say that I think you're really right that like queer people do have to take a certain level of responsibility in their storytelling, because I think all of us, just by the sheer nature of being born queer, being born different than your surroundings, and of what's accepted, we have a little bit more homework to do.
Mm.
It's just normal. So I feel like it's I agree that I think it's a natural part of a queer person's songwriting process.
Yeah, I think so. And I like the more I kind of think about it, and sort of, I don't know, particularly in these last few years of sort of queer music becoming more of like a genre. I mean, it always has been there, I guess, but I guess the way
Yeah.
that people can now just create stuff themselves and put it out there themselves. Um,
Yes.
Before maybe queer stories, it was through novels or art or film, but I feel that actually now music is kind of becoming a new area where we can share our stories together. And you can do
I
it in a
agree.
3 minute pop song, which is quite fun. So, yeah.
And I think I think you're so right. I mean, that's kind of, for me, has been very much a mission. And I think that has changed. But the fact that, queer, if you and I were having this conversation, let's say in the early 2000s, queer music would have been described as non-queer people's music that was like sort of we adopted, let's say something, music of, let's say, Madonna, Kate Bush, I know, is something that a lot of queer people who love, and I love her music, and I'm very much inspired by her music. But she's not a queer person, but
It's been
we
yeah,
adopted her
adopted.
music. We adopted her music. We adopted a lot of people's music who they themselves weren't actually queer, but they had themes and just styles of music that just like gave us life.
Yeah.
And now I think I'm seeing way more of us coming out of the woodworks and saying, okay, there is actually a genre that is queer music, and it is a mixture of many, many, many genres, but we do kind of have a unified voice.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, which is cool, which is great to see.
It's
But
great.
yeah,
I'm so
I love
happy.
it. And kind of touching on there, some of those inspirations, and maybe think people that have been adopted by the queer community. Is there anyone that you have in your mind as kind of real inspirations for your work?
Well, Kate Bush, I would definitely
Yeah.
say, is probably one of my primary songwriting
Hmm.
inspirations. Tori Amos, I think, also is somebody whose music sat with me I mean, I discovered her music when I was 12. I'm 42. So her music has been with me for a
Looking
long.
great, and you're 42.
Oh, thank you. It's that, it's those truth serums that I keep
Oh
rubbing
yeah,
on
right.
my face. Um, David Bowie and obviously Brian Eno,
Mhm.
very much, both of them as composers and as arrangers and performers, very much inspire me. I will be that person who says that he listens to Derek and the Dominoes, that one Derek and the Dominoes record. I listen to that record at least once or twice a year. I'm a real, give me a noodly guitar solo any day of the week and I'm in. All the first five Zeppelin records are pretty much always on heavy rotation here. Um, the Smiths,
Mhm.
Roxy Music.
Yeah.
I've always been a big Jill Scott fan because I really love poetry with music, and
Yeah.
I think he is like one of the ones. Patti Smith, PJ Harvey,
Yeah.
um, The Roots is probably one of my favorite bands to go see play
Mm,
ever.
yeah,
And I feel like their shows are always dynamic and wild.
yeah.
I don't know if you're a Roots fan, but if you're not, you should be. A Tribe
I'll need
Called
to
Quest.
go and check them out much more.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I will say that because of where I grew up in Brooklyn, salsa was pretty much in every bodega. Like you would
Mhm.
walk into a bodega and pretty much they were either playing something by Willie Colon or Hector Lavoe, and Celia Cruz of more of the pop salsa vibe. You would hear a lot of that.
Mm,
So I just feel like that those sounds are also like, even though I wouldn't say like I don't write salsa music, but I feel like that stuff is in there.
right. It's thrown into the mix
It's
somewhere.
thrown into the mix. Like I think also again this track Joshua of Mayo Peck, like just the whole approach to the arrangement is very much like, it's funny. I played it for a bunch of friends out here in Portland. They were like, "Wow, this record sounds really New York," and I was like, "Well, kind of not a mistake."
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah,
the basis and the inspiration from the story, I guess. So you can
yeah, exactly. It's just
use
like,
that in the sound, so that's good.
yes, exactly.
It's good they picked up on
Exactly. And that's very much my approach. Like I want my songs to sound like where they take place,
that. Mm,
so
yeah,
that you are
I
there with them. Yeah.
and I guess that's maybe coming from you as being a producer as well. I guess
Yes,
that's quite a production hat. I feel
it
like
is.
what you're saying there, then sort of trying to grasp those sounds, which we'll touch on a little bit. Actually, I want to ask you a little bit
Yeah.
about being a producer, but before
Yeah.
that, I just want to
Yeah.
talk about your. So you're we're going to hear another track from you, which is one of the artists you already mentioned, which is the Smiths, and the
Yes.
cover that you did of that. Tell us a little bit about this cover. The Smiths, I
Oh,
absolutely adore. So
that's right. It's There Is a Light That Will Never Go Out, which is the final song on The Queen Is Dead. If people don't know that album, you should probably listen to it. And I know that talking about Morrissey right now, especially amongst us queers, is kind of a hot button. Is
yeah,
that true that talking about Morrissey in I mean, you're in the UK. Are people mad at him?
yeah, but I mean, like, I, I mean, I can't speak for everybody. I feel like Morrissey has always had people have always been slightly mad at him for like various different things over the years. I mean, I'm not excusing anything, but I'm just
Are
he
you mad at him?
yeah. I mean, yeah, but also there, it's a really interesting thing though, isn't it? Like, when does the music separate from the artist as well? And like when an artist does something, that's not good, then
Yeah,
how can you separate where there's music that you actually adore and love as well? It's an
right.
interesting one. I don't know the
Well,
answer.
I don't know the answer either, but I think there is a person I have to mention in order to answer this question. My best, I have a lot of best friends. One of my best friends is a fiction writer named Richard Mirabella, who actually he has his first full length novel coming out, not in 2022, but actually in 2023, if you could believe that.
Okay.
It's already there. But Richard and I call him Benj, so we'll call him Benj for the rest of this interview. But he and I would say, um, when it comes to like my taste in music these days, he's always who I go to, and him and I talk about this topic in particularly, like, is the artist what they eat? Is kind of how we frame
Right.
this. He recently bought a piece of art from someone on the internet that he just loved. I mean, it was like this, like very sexy piece, and it was a male nude, and then he discovered that the artist is Mormon
Okay.
and publicly identifies as Mormon. And he called me and he was just kind of like, oh, why did I buy this? Oh my God. And I was like, well, at the end of the day, is eating junk food going to kill you? And the answer is yes, in excess.
Hmm.
And so, with that said, another thing that Benj always says to me is that all songs are haunted houses, which I think is true.
Okay.
Meaning, and I think what he means by that is every song carries with it the thing that inspired it,
Right.
everybody who played on it and everything they had to say about that song, everybody who has also played it since.
Mm.
And when I started recording All Them Princes, this was a conversation he had, and Benj said this to me, and he was like, Matt, every song is a haunted house. So at some point, um, you know, you have to walk through that haunted house and experience like both the things that are great, the good blithe spirits that you may encounter, but you're also going to encounter some stuff that is horrifying.
Yeah.
And There Is a Light That Never Goes Out was a song it's one of my husband's favorite songs. And it's one of my favorite songs by the Smiths because I feel like it's one of the few times that, at least in my opinion, I'm hearing the voices of people who have been queer bashed,
Mm-hmm.
people who have been like not invited to certain parties because they are queer. Um, I hear the voices of every time someone gets stood up on a date
Mm.
is already a tragedy. But when a queer person gets stood up on a date as a young person, it feels different. I don't know
Mm.
if you feel this, but I feel like it feels there's a type of rejection and pain that I think that happens for a queer person that is different than for somebody who is not queer.
Mm.
And so I felt like in reviewing that song, so my cover of it, I wanted it to feel like a haunted house, and it to sound like a queer person who finally got to go out and feel loved and accepted for the first time in a really long time.
Mm.
And so I wanted to like kind of get how they would feel at 5 o'clock in the morning after they've just had this like really, really wicked night out, and they're not ready to go home, and they're not ready to let the night end, but they know that eventually when they wake up tomorrow morning, they're going to feel back to being like this lonely queer person again.
Yeah.
And I would venture to say that the haunting of Marcy in that song is absolutely there. I
Mm.
feel like he is probably somebody who experienced a lot of rejection
Yeah.
before acceptance, and I think it's there in that song.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. What a great song. This was a live version of it as well, right? You-
For the most part, I recorded the Wurlitzer and vocals live, right, like here,
Yeah.
and then I overdubbed some backing vocals on there in post,
Mm.
just because I wanted those ghosts.
One of those ghosts.
I
I
needed to
love
have
that. Have you
vocals.
used that in a song yet? Every song is a haunted house. Because that's a great
Oh,
lyric.
but yeah, it is kind of a good lyric. I haven't, but I think the concept really, really rings true
Yeah,
for
I
me.
love it. I mean,
You know.
snap that up before someone else steals it. Or maybe
Well,
it's Benj that needs to steal
maybe
it.
Benj can use it in one of his writings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't know his work, his name is Richard Mirabella, and he has some short fiction that's already out there in distribution.
Okay.
And he is a cis queer male himself, who writes quite a bit of. A lot of his fiction really meditates on the queer male experience, not necessarily in a literal way, but I think that you would like his work.
Yeah,
It's really
yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love it. Yeah, well, always keen to hear of other queer writers as well. Like, absolutely.
um,
I love to devour all of that, all of the queer art that's being made.
yeah.
Well, listen, Matt, it's been so lovely to chat to you. I want to just hear a little bit about your work as a producer as well, because it's another little hat, and I think
It's another
producer,
little hat.
another little hat, and
Um,
producers are really
yeah.
awesome people. And
Well,
so, yes, yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
they can be awesome people. I also think that we're probably the grouchiest of musicians,
Mm.
just because we have a lot of things to think about. Um, it's what I went to school for. I studied studio production at State College of New York at Purchase. Um, Purchase represent for those who know that. Um, I have made records with Audra Isadora, Dane Terry, who's another also queer singer-songwriter. Audra Isadora is another queer singer-songwriter. I'm currently making a record with Dan Fishback, who is a playwright and singer-songwriter from New York, who's also queer. I've made a couple of band records as well. I've been making records as the lead producer. I've been doing that probably since 2007, 2008. Before that, I was kind of more of a second chair person, mostly focusing on arrangements.
Mhm.
I would say that people come to me for when they want an orchestra on their record, on their song, because that's something I feel like I excel at, is part writing.
I love
Vocal
that.
production and vocal editing is definitely something so I would say that I feel like where I feel the best, I do my best work when there is a record, a singer or a band that wants something that sounds very organic at its core with decorations of synths.
Yeah,
And I would say like Daniel Lenoir, I don't know if you know this producer,
I do.
but they are probably my biggest influence as a
Oh,
producer.
cool.
They
Okay.
produced the record Octune Baby, for
Oh,
example.
okay. Nice.
I you Yeah, so I like things that have like a lot of muddy sounding synths with like very organic instruments
Mm,
um, at its core.
cool.
Yeah,
I love
so
it.
I don't know if that answers your
Yeah,
question.
and like I think yeah, it's such a I mean it's such a useful skill I think to have these days, particularly, you know, being able to produce for other people, but also I guess for yourself as well, as you
Well,
know, the tools are
that's
there.
that's true. I will say that I just started making a new record, and something that I think I learned with making All Them Princes is that you probably shouldn't produce your own records.
Mm,
Not if you're looking, if you're trying to achieve a very, like, I would say that my point of view as a producer is I want whatever we work on together to sound expensive, even if we don't spend a lot of money on it. I want this to
yep.
sound expensive. And when
Mhm.
I say sound expensive, mostly what I'm saying is that it needs to be mixed where it makes sense for for the experience you want your listener to have.
Right.
Um, so that's one thing I don't really do a whole lot of. Mixing is something I don't do here, if I do it at all. And generally, when I work with an artist, I want them to expect that we will mix elsewhere with somebody else.
Right.
Because I think mixing is a different skill than producing.
Mm,
It is. It's
yeah.
absolutely a different skill. And it relies very heavily on having the right gear for the result that you're trying to get.
Right.
And I will say that after having just produced this record myself, the thing that there were two things that I feel like were missing for me. One was having somebody do what I would do for an artist, is check them, which
Yes.
means like asking them the right question.
Challenge them.
Yeah, well, just check them, just being like, is this really what you want? Or are you choosing the sound because it's all you have right now?
Right.
And I feel like if the answer is B, then we haven't found the right sound yet.
Yeah.
And I wish that somebody was there doing that with me. I also think that artists need a good project manager there to make sure that they are not spending 2 weeks working on one song.
Yeah.
So I would say that having done this, yes, I think it's great that I can like produce all the basic tracks myself. But on the next go around, I definitely want to have another producer
Mm,
there. Because I just feel like, yeah, like it's helpful to have those extra pair of ears that don't care about what the song is about, and
yeah.
they don't care about like all these like minutia details that you like. I would love to be able to just sit back and just be the artist, you know,
Yeah.
and just sing my heart out and let somebody else do all the editing,
Worry
because
about that stuff. Yeah. And
yeah,
yeah, I mean that's why it's important. I think that's why it works. I don't think I ever really, until I worked with a producer, I never totally understood like what the like what the point
their
was.
role,
Yeah,
yeah,
like what the role other than like obviously someone to like help with, you know, pressing record. But it's so much more than that. It is like it's having a collaborator in the room with you who can kind of
yeah,
like yeah let you focus on the bits that are actually really important and uh
yeah.
and yeah and check you and challenge and like yeah
And just
maybe
you.
make you think about the songs in different ways that you might not have thought about.
Exactly. And I think producers are in generally with not only arranging parts, they're also arranging the experience.
Mm,
They're making sure that the listener is being hypnotized enough to have this be an exciting experience. They're not, a producer doesn't just think about what's happening when the song is being played, or at least I think a good producer, the producers who I've worked with, who I've had the best time with, are people who are making sure that even the moments of silence are being considered.
yeah.
And because that's part of what the listener is going to have.
Mm,
um yeah, there's an engineer I work with that lives here in the States, who I absolutely adore. His name is Andy Baldwin. We've worked on countless projects together at this point. And he has said two, like I would say, two things to me that have become my tenets. One is, if you have songs to sing, only then you should be singing them, or somebody should be singing them. And number two is, every second that a song is playing is part of the listener's experience.
Mm.
So if you, as the artist or the producer, aren't considering every second that's on tape, then you're not really doing your job.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Good, good
So those are
advice.
good. I think those are good tenets to live
I
by.
would say so. We can add that to our. So you can be a teacher, producer, songwriter. Here's you had a master class and some tips and advice
Oh no! Oh
for
no! I don't
free.
want that.
No, it's okay. We won't promote it as a masterclass, but no, it's just good. It's good to get an insight into all of the things that make up the songs, and make the stuff that comes out, because it doesn't just happen like that. It
No,
takes
it doesn't. It
a
is not
lot of a
magic.
lot of people and a lot of time and a lot of trying and editing and failing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious for you. Like, did you enjoy the self-produced or the non-self-produced projects in a different way? I mean, was there, do you have a preference now, or would you say that there's a time and a place for both?
Yeah, I think I going into working with a producer, which I did for my last EP.
Yeah,
Um,
which is
I'd
freaking
never.
awesome, by the way.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad you enjoy it.
Thanks
But
for
like
making.
I think the experience allowed, because I'd never really worked with a producer really in that way before. I'd worked with previous stuff was much more like, I guess, just engineers who were literally there to make sure that it sounded good, but
Yeah,
they weren't
exactly.
involved in like this. It was very much my sound that I wanted to kind of bring out, and it was more in a band as well. Whereas this
Right.
was very much me coming in as like a singer, I guess.
Yeah.
And it was funny actually, me letting go. A big part of that was like me letting go of my guitar and like the idea of me doing is a live stuff, and like actually like, because what I really wanted to do was what he brought out of me, which was to make it pop and explore synths. But it was almost like I knew that's what I wanted, but almost
Right.
like he had to like make me say it and do it in the studio. Because when I first,
Yeah.
the songs that I was going to record were none of the songs that came out that I actually ended up recording.
Wow.
I went in with like my guitar, sang him some live stuff, and like it was all very, it would have been like a very acousticy
Sure.
thing. But then
Okay.
I'd just dabbled randomly on a thing in GarageBand at some point, which was kind of synths and me
Sure.
singing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I do also have this thing. Oh, I don't know what I feel about it. And then that's the song that became Sunrise. And then that was like what led as going down like the synth route.
Right.
But it was almost like I was a bit shy. I was a bit shy about bringing it
Wow.
out. So it was a really, really good experience, I think, because it kind of, yeah, just that collaboration thing was really
That
key
collaboration thing, it really,
key
it
to it
really
working.
changes
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
Well, yeah.
So I think it's very beneficial. Absolutely.
Would you do it again?
Yeah, I think so. I guess on the future horizon, I think I've got some like collaborations I'm kind of working on, which is again a kind of new thing with like collaborating with artists remotely
Yeah.
as well, and then seeing what kind of comes out of that. Also, probably relying on or using producers in the mix there as well. And then I think I definitely would work with producers again, maybe different producers.
Yeah.
Also, I want to kind of learn a little bit more about it myself, because then I think
Yeah.
um, there's still some other songs that weren't recorded because it didn't really fit with him as a producer. But actually,
Gotcha.
I still think they've got something. We
Yeah.
just we weren't matched on those songs, and that's fine. So
Right.
doesn't mean that they have to be chucked away.
No, just maybe
It's a
through a
different
different lens.
person,
And
or it's a different project, or it's more something that I try and just do myself. So
yeah, and I would tend to agree that I feel like it really depends on the song. And I also think for something I learned as well during making All Them Princes was like, I know that like when I start writing a song, or at least I should say when I start recording a song,
mhm.
there are some like go-to things that I will always do.
Mm.
And while that's great to like honor your instincts, at the end of the day, like, am I doing right by the song? For me personally, like I always immediately think, okay, well, how can I incorporate an orchestra into the song because that's just something I love doing.
Yeah.
But does that really is that really the right choice for this song?
Yeah.
At least in this at least in the quote unquote definitive recorded version of the song, like is that really doing the right thing? And I feel like a producer's like their role is making sure that you're answering that question
Yeah.
For yourself in a fair and reasonable and non-judgmental, objective, loving way.
Yeah.
In the spirit of collaboration. Because I'll say this, like I feel like the things that for me personally had that I love so much about this record that I just finished are the things that came from contributions from other people.
Yeah.
You know, particularly there's a drummer that played on this he didn't play on everything, but he played on most of it. And I feel like his advice and thoughtfulness brought out things that I just never would have thought of.
Well, yeah, because you don't. That's not your area of skill, and you don't have to.
No, I don't play drums.
Yeah, exactly. No. So, like, you'd be doing it a disservice, I guess, if you tried to do everything.
No, exactly. So I feel like the spirit collab. The best things happen when there's a couple of chefs in the kitchen.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I think collaboration is key in life going forward in many ways. Well, Matt Katz, full name you as everybody does. Thank you so much for coming to chat to me.
Thank you for chatting with me. It's been a blast.
Yeah, it'd be really lovely to find out a little bit behind the songs and the music life across the board. Where is there anything coming up that we should watch out for from you?
I am in the process of recording a new record right now. I'm in the demo phase. So I've got a bunch, and I'll be sharing maybe some songs a little bit earlier as they go along. But the thing that's going to be coming out sooner than that is, this bank of covers that I like from where my Smyth's cover comes from. I call it the town of Inspitown, where like you visit with songs that inspire you. So I'm doing another set of those that I'm going to release on SoundCloud first in a couple of months.
Nice.
I will not say what's on them, but I will say that it is primarily female singer-songwriters that I'm visiting with for that set of covers. So around Christmas time, I'm going to put out a few covers. I'm also in the process of producing a record with my friend Dan Fishback right now in New York. And we don't have a release schedule just yet, but it's been really a blast working with him.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. We will keep our eyes and ears out for all of those projects coming up. Well, I wish you a wonderful day, afternoon, evening, nighttime. All of the above. And we will catch you in cyberspace and hopefully in real life at some point.
I hope so. I'd love to meet you and give you a hug and listen to you sing.
Yeah, same. Right back at you.
Come play in Portland. Come play here.
Okay, great. Yeah. I'm just organizing a world tour all the time at the moment. So
all the
it's
time.
fantasy until it happens. So it's well. All right. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Venn. Take care now.
Bye.